Welcome to America by Faith, a Fear Not fellowship. We are reclaiming America in 2026. This is a ministry of the New York Faith and Freedom Coalition. We have our regular meetings twice a month here in Newburgh, New York, on the second and fourth Saturday of each month. And we're currently studying. We're involved with Rebuilding Liberty, Part 2, which is a session between January and June 2026, as we're preparing for the celebration of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. We're actually studying the New York State Constitution, and this lesson is up to Lesson 3. If you've missed the other two lessons, you can find them online as well. So welcome to Lesson 3. We begin with the word of the Lord that we have for the new year, and that word is raise the standard. And we got that from Isaiah 59:19 that says, when the enemy shall come in like a flood, the Spirit of the Lord shall lift up a standard against them. And our encouragement is for each individual to look to see where you can raise the standard, first of all, in your own personal life. If you're still dealing with sin, repent of it and get it right and continue to grow in the Lord. As far as getting involved with your community, whether it's your town council, your school board, or wherever God is calling you to get engaged in civic affairs, raise the standard. Whatever the Holy Spirit is encouraging you to do, just simply say yes to the Lord and raise the standard. Because if we can raise the standard as individuals, we'll raise the standard in our community and we'll raise the standard in the nation until we are once again that one nation under God. So now we're looking at the New York State Constitution and the New York State government. So just take a brief look at it here. I'm going to just point here. We have the three branches of government that are also in the New York State Constitution as well as in the federal Constitution. And where did our founders get the idea of three branches of government? Well, let's look right to the Bible, Isaiah 33:22. Which says, for the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king. In other words, the Lord is our judicial branch, he's our legislative branch, and he is our executive branch. Now, in our humanity, we can't be all three. That's why we have to divide it up into three sections so that we can have the counterbalance one against the other. And we will talk about these more in depth as we go along. So let's continue to take a look here. Just a brief review of where we came from. We looked at the New York's first Constitution, which was formed in 1777. It was written then. Now, remember, it was written during the American Revolution. In fact, it was toward the beginning of the American Revolution. Remember that Manhattan at that time was occupied by the British. And so our founders had to go to Kingston, New York, which was the first capital of New York, and that's where the New York State Constitution was actually written. New York was a battleground. Government had to form while the war raged, and we created a state framework for all three branches of the government, the legislature, the governor's office, and our courts. Now, voting was limited. We talked about this in previous segments. You had to own property. You had to have property requirements. And for the assembly, it had to be for men with property of certain value thresholds. And for the state senate, had to be men with higher property thresholds. We talked about this last time, that basically there were three requirements to vote in New York State in the beginning. First of all, you had to be white, a male, and a property owner. Now, today we look at that as being pretty restrictive, but back then, believe it or not, that was a step toward liberty and freedom. So the key theme was that freedom was declared, but participation was still restricted. The lesson is liberty grows over time, but it must be protected intentionally. And we talked about the biblical qualifications for good leadership taken from Exodus 18:21. But select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Now, we talked about how that was actually Jethro's counsel to Moses when Moses was being overwhelmed with all the people that he had to take care of. And Jethro told him, no, you got to break it up and select rulers over certain segments, over officials, over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And that's actually where we also get the idea of separation of government, selecting leaders over the town, over the county, over the state, and over the nation. You see, it all comes back to the Bible. John Jay, one of the first Chief Justices of the U.S. Supreme Court, one of the signers of the New York State Constitution, he was also the president of the American Bible Society. He said, and we quote, "Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and it is the duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians as their rulers." One of the signers of the New York State Constitution was Gouverneur Morris. And our last session, we took a look at John Jay. This time, we're going to take a look at Gouverneur Morris. We're going to take a look and learn just a little bit about him as well.
Gouverneur Morris, 1752 to 1816, delegate from Pennsylvania, signer of the Constitution. Gouverneur Morris was born in New York to a family known for its wealth and its commitment to public service. He graduated from King's College, now Columbia University, and was later admitted to the bar. Morris carried the scars of at least 2 accidents throughout his life. One as a teenager, when he dropped a kettle, scalding his arm and side. The second as an adult, when he lost the lower part of his leg after a carriage accident. Despite the loss of the lower part of his leg, Morris continued to ride horses, shoot river rapids, and dance. Morris showed an interest in politics, just as tensions between Britain and the colonies emerged. Despite his fears that the protest movement against Parliament's taxation policies and trade regulations would devolve into mob rule, by 1775, Morris had thrown in his lot with the Americans who would soon press for independence. He signaled his political choice by taking a seat in New York's Revolutionary Provincial Congress from 1775 to 1777. After the Declaration of Independence was signed, Morris joined John Jay and Robert R. Livingston in drafting the first Constitution, turning New York into a state rather than a colony. Morris held a seat in the New York State Legislature beginning in 1777 and attended the Continental Congress in 1778. At 26, he stood out as one of the youngest and most brilliant of the congressional delegates. But signs of Morris's growing nationalism clashed with New York Governor George Clinton's equally strong commitment to state sovereignty. And in 1779, the Clinton faction forced the defeat of Morris's bid for re-election to the Continental Congress. He then relocated to Philadelphia. Beginning in 1781, he served for 4 years as the main assistant to Robert Morris, the Superintendent of Finance of the United States, and one of the wealthiest men in America. When the call went out for a constitutional convention, both men were among the 8 chosen to represent Pennsylvania. But while Robert Morris was virtually silent during the debates, Gouverneur Morris was a leading figure in the convention debates. He spoke 173 times, taking the floor more often than the other 2 dominating figures, James Madison and James Wilson. He often interjected wit and sarcasm into his comments supporting an empowered new government. During the convention, he spoke openly against slavery, calling it a nefarious institution, the curse of heaven on the states where it prevailed. Morris served on multiple convention committees, including the Committee on Postponed Matters. And from his position on the Committee of Style, he took on the actual drafting of the Constitution. It was Morris who perfected the preamble, beginning with the soaring words, "We the people of the United States." Scholars sometimes refer to him as the penman of the Constitution. He signed the Constitution on September 17, 1787. After the Constitution was ratified, Morris served as minister plenipotentiary to France, where he observed with horror the French Reign of Terror, a fate he believed America had avoided by adopting the Constitution. He returned to the U.S. in 1798 and won election to the Senate 2 years later, but lost his seat after Jefferson's Republican Party took control of the government. After his term in the Senate ended, Morris moved home to New York, where he devoted his energies to investment in enterprises like the creation of the Erie Canal. His last public action was to support the Hartford Convention called by the New England Federalists to protest the War of 1812. Aged 57, Morris at last became a husband, marrying Anne Carey Randolph of Virginia. The couple lived happily together until his death, aged 64, in November 1816.
In our next session, we'll take a look at the other primary signer of the Declaration, Robert Livingston. Now let's go back for a minute to the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. Remember, the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. This was before the New York State Constitution. Now, the New York State Constitution was written before, remember, the Constitution of the United States, which was written in 1787. So this was really 11 years before the national Constitution. The state constitution was first. In other words, the national government was created by the states. The states weren't created by the national government, so the states came first. But in the Declaration of Independence, which came first before all of them, 1776, it says, the preamble says, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. That's really what we want to talk about and emphasize, because this is where all of our rights come from. They come from the laws of nature and nature's God, not from government. So this is what we need to really understand, even when we look at the New York State Constitution as well. Where did our founders get the idea of natural law? Where did that come from? Well, it wasn't a modern idea. Thomas Aquinas, a Catholic theologian in the 13th century, explicitly tied natural law to the idea of God, to God's law. And he said that human law is only valid if it aligns with God's moral law. This was also repeated by our founders, like James Wilson, who said that our civic law must be consistent with divine law as well. And the Magna Carta came after Thomas Aquinas. Actually, before that, in 1215, it asserted that even the king must be subject to the law. This was recognized as pre-existing rights, not rights granted by the crown. So let's take a couple of minutes here to take a look at what the Magna Carta was all about.
This may look like a plain, unassuming piece of parchment, but is actually one of the most famous documents in the world. Magna Carta, meaning the Great Charter, has inspired people across the centuries, from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi. But why was the Charter originally created, and what does it actually say? Let us take you back to medieval England. It's the year 1215, and the ruler is King John. Many people believe that King John was one of the worst kings in history. He imprisoned his former wife, he starved his opponents to death, he allegedly murdered his own nephew, and pulled the beards of the Irish chiefs. King John had imposed heavy taxes on his barons in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars. If they refused to pay, he punished them severely or seized their property. The barons demanded that King John obey the law. When he refused, they captured London and John was forced to negotiate. The two sides met at Runnymede in June 1215. The result of the negotiations was written down by the king's clerks into the document we know as Magna Carta. Although most of the Charter's clauses dealt with medieval rights and customs, Magna Carta has become a powerful symbol of liberty around the world. The most famous clause, which is still part of the law today, for the first time gave all free men the right to justice and a fair trial. No man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the judgment of their equals and by the law of the land. To no one will we sell. However, this clause was not as liberal as it sounds. The Charter only applied to free men. The vast majority of people in 1215 were unfree peasants who were ruled over by their landowners. And although Magna Carta was intended to create peace between King John and his rebellious barons, England was plunged into civil war after the Pope declared the Charter invalid. When King John died of dysentery in 1216, 9-year-old Henry III took to the throne. To keep the peace, Magna Carta was reissued several times during the 13th century, until it was finally made part of English law. Magna Carta has lived on for 800 years and is echoed in the United States Declaration of Independence and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Perhaps Magna Carta's most important legacy is that everyone, including our leaders, must obey the law. What started out as a document of specific complaints from a group of barons has turned into an international symbol of liberty, without which we might not have the rights we value so much today.
John Locke is one of the founders, one of the philosophers that our founders look to. He has the most direct intellectual source for America's language of God-given rights. Locke explicitly grounded our rights in God. He said, quote, "Men being all the workmanship of one omnipotent and infinitely wise maker, they are his property." In other words, Locke was saying we belong to God. And if we belong to God, we need to live according to his rules, according to his law. That is primary. Locke taught that God gives human life, liberty, and property, and that governments exist to protect those rights. If government violates them, then it loses its legitimacy. Now, I'm sure that you can remember some of the familiarity of this language where God gives us life, liberty, and property. Now, in the Declaration, it became the pursuit of happiness, but originally that idea was property, because it was thought that only if you can pursue your own property can you really pursue happiness. That was the idea. So this flows almost word to word into Americans' founding documents. Now, we talked about human dignity. Where did they get the idea of human dignity? Came from Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. Human identity comes from God with dignity, purpose, and moral worth. It's really important to understand that. God is the ultimate lawgiver. The Lord is our judge. The Lord is our lawgiver. The Lord is our king. Again, the three branches of government taken from the image of God. And kings and rulers are morally accountable to God. Remember the story in the Bible about Nathan confronting King David when David sinned against Bathsheba and even had her husband sent to the front lines to be killed. Nathan the prophet called David to account. Now we have to understand that the civic leaders must be subject to the prophets, and it's the job of the church to speak truth to the civic leaders. It was Martin Luther King who said that we're not to be the lord of the to control the government, neither are we to be slaves to the government, but we are to be the conscience of government. And that's the role of the state. We are to be the conscience of government and to keep our civic leaders accountable to the laws of God as well. There are limits on government power. The law of Moses restrains rulers just as much as it does citizens. So everyone has to come under God's law. Now, this produced a revolutionary idea for the ancient world that no ruler is absolute. Remember, it was Lord Acton who told us that absolute power corrupts absolutely. So we need to recognize this is the first time really in world history that that rulers were being held to a higher order, to a higher account. And this was revolutionary at the time. So God is the foundation of our government. Without God, Dwight D. Eisenhower told us, without going a little bit more into modern times, he said, without God, there could be no American form of government, no an American way of life. Recognition of the supreme being is the first, the most basic expression of Americanism. So if someone tells me, Bill, are you trying to tell me that I can't be an American if I don't believe in God? Well, I'll tell them quite frankly, yeah, you can be an American. Anyone can who fulfills the requirements for citizenship. But you certainly can't be a good American if you can't even ascribe to our national motto, which is in God we trust. That's the first, the most basic expression of Americanism is the acknowledgement of God. In fact, that is our national motto. It is in God we trust. And if someone can't ascribe to that, I'm sorry, they can be an American, but they certainly won't be a good one. And then John Kennedy, a little bit later, 1963, tells us that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. So what is the purpose then of the New York State Constitution and government? Again, the preamble to the New York State Constitution says this, says, we the people of the state of New York, grateful to Almighty God for our freedom in order to secure its blessings, do establish this Constitution. There it is in black and white. They said it themselves. What are its blessings? Its blessings are simply the rights given to us by nature's God, which is the God of the Bible. So let's take a quick overview now of the articles of the New York State Constitution. And we're going, in future sessions, we're going to go into each one of these in detail. But for today's lesson, let's just take a brief look at them and see what they're all about. Article 1 is the Bill of Rights. In this article, there are 18 sections that define the Bill of Rights for its citizens. Rights include a right to a trial by jury, fair wages, and equal protection under the Civil Rights Act, as well as other provisions that protect citizens. Article 2, suffrage. This article talks about voting rights and responsibilities. Its sections range from voter qualifications to the rights of those who are not permitted to vote by law. Articles 3 through 6, legislative, executive officers, and civil departments, and the judiciary. All four of these articles speak to the powers of the legislative, executive, and judicial branches of the New York State government. This is where the power of each branch is defined. Article 5 involves civil positions like Attorney General. Now remember, we talked about this when we talked about the National Constitution, and we'll see that a lot of these rights were going to be duplicated in the national And some of these powers are reserved only for the states, and some of them are what we call concurrent powers. Also, the federal government has authority in these areas as well. Articles 7 and 8, state and local finance. Both of these articles are about state and local finance, respectively. Article 7 is all about the state budget, while Article 8 is more about the local towns and their financial rights and responsibilities. Article 9, local governments. This article provides the Bill of Rights for local governments, local laws, and statute rights. Article 10, corporations. Here is where the rights and responsibilities of public corporations and financial institutions, including the Port Authority, are mapped out. In Article 11, we talk about education. The public school system and the Board of Regents, who oversees it, are governed by this article. Article 12, state and defense and militia responsibilities and rights are explained in this article. Article 13, public officers. This article involves the rights and responsibilities of public officers, including term length, pay, and the oath of office. I'm tempted in each one of these to get into it because there's so much to be said for each one of these areas, but we will go into detail on them in future sessions as we come together. Anyway, Articles 14 and 15, conservation and canals. Both of these articles speak to the preservation of land and canals, including the sale and the use of each. Article 16, taxation. This article determines who pays taxes. Public official salaries and exemptions from taxation are contained in this one. Article 17, social welfare. Public health and social welfare are discussed in this article, which includes provisions ranging from the building of hospitals to the treatment and care of the mentally ill. And Article 18, housing. This article discusses housing rights and responsibilities, including low-income housing, nursing homes, and the acquisition of property for the purpose of creating affordable communities. Articles 19 and 20, ultimately, and instructions on how to amend the Constitution and the time limit for an amendment to take effect. One would check out Articles 19 and 20. These are the only articles that don't have to do with day-to-day living. All the others have to do with our day-to-day living. And we will, like I said, go into these in more details in future sessions. So you want to be sure that you come to our meetings, or for sure check out the videos when they are there. So let's take a look at some questions there that for you to really look at, and we spoke about them in the classroom, but some things that you could really meditate and think about yourself. Which of these articles do you believe are the most important to you? Which articles indicate areas that are exclusive to the state's authority? Now, we told you that some of them are only for the states. And if you recall from what we talked in previous sessions, the state constitution, the state governments have a lot more to do with our day-to-day living than the national government, because it's the state constitutions that govern over taxes, over our housing, over education, over all these areas. Now, in a lot of areas, the federal government has usurped authority, but that's where we need to rein things back in and get things back to the states and to the people where they belong. Which articles indicate concurrent authority with the federal constitution? Take a look at them and see which ones that you believe are shared both by the federal government and the state government. Just for example, like taxes, you pay state taxes and you pay federal taxes. These are what we call concurrent authorities, where they both have authority in that particular area. Which articles indicate areas where you can be personally engaged to serve as a watchdog to ensure that the provisions stated therein are not being violated? This comes down to action. Now, where does God want you to be involved? Maybe in the education system, maybe in the local town government system. Where does God want you to be more involved? Where will you raise the standard and become more engaged, more involved? And even studying this course, you're being more informed, which is really important, because it was Thomas Jefferson who told us, he said, if a people expect to remain ignorant and free, they expect what never was and never will be. So it's really to your credit that you're really learning about this so that you can be equipped and informed to be a responsible citizen of New York State and, in fact, of the United States of America, to see this state and this nation turn back to God. So at our next meeting, like I said, we're going to cover, this is just a brief preview of what we're going to do. We're going to look at Article 1 of the Constitution, which is the state's Bill of Rights. And many of these protections mirror the federal Bill of Rights, but New York sometimes applies them more broadly. We're going to talk about freedom of religion, freedom of speech and press, the right to assemble, due process of law, equal protection under the law, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, the rights of the accused, and the right to a fair trial. These rights shape daily life far more often than we realize, from zoning disputes to school policies to criminal justice. And we talked about coming events that we have coming up. If you happen to see this before these things happen, know that we're having on September 22nd at 4 o'clock at the Circleville Church. We're going to have Trevor Loudon, who's the author of The Enemies Within. He's going to be our guest speaker at our joint Cloth and Faith and Freedom Coalition meeting. Cloth stands for Christian Leaders of the Hudson, and Faith and Freedom Coalition, you know, is a state affiliate of the Faith and Freedom Coalition of America. Reverend Bill Banuchi, happen to be the executive director of that as well. And then we have coming up in June, 25th and 27th, we encourage you to join us, Road to Majority in Washington, D.C. We're going to be there at the Washington Hilton. If you want more information on that, shoot me an email. Let me know. Get an email to Bill at nyfaithandfreedomcoalition.com, and I'll get you all the information that you need so you can join us as the New York delegation as we go to the Road to Majority. And you can also find out more about that on the Faith and Freedom Coalition website as well. So we pray that you got something out of this session today. Our next meeting will be on February 28th at 6 to 8 p.m. here at our Newburgh office at 436 North Robinson Avenue in Newburgh. And we hope to see you then. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I can be found at bill@nyfaithandfreedom.com, or my cell number is 845-561-9499. Feel free to contact me however you'd like, and we'll be able to help you to be equipped to see America once again, one nation under God. Talk to you then. Take care.